Afternoon, everybody. This is Anita Gandhi from Arihant Capital Markets Limited. I welcome you all to today's web session, Decoding Crisis in Debt Mutual Funds, to be addressed by our keynote speaker, Mr. Mahendra Jaju. He is CIO Fixed Income Mirai Asset Management. So the world has undergone a lot of changes in last 1 month after the pandemic, and the globe has tremendously slowed down. And the safety of human life has become very important objective of the human mankind. We have seen tremendous slowdown in equity as well as debt market. The global slowdown has impacted both the markets, equity as well as debt markets. At one point of time, India, in early 90s, India was a high interest rate economy, and it offered very attractive yields to the investors, those who invested in debt. Over a period of time, though interest rates came down, debt still remained attractive because of its very nature of capital protection. At the same time, it offered a lot of advantages from the tax angle for the long-term investors. However, due to recent overall situation, we have seen sudden crisis, especially liquidity crisis happening in NBFCs. At the same time, we have seen that banks are flush with the funds. So to understand the nuances of all these things in the debt market, we have today with us the industry expert, Mr. Mahendra Jaju, who's CIO Fixed Income Mirai Asset Management. So I will first brief you as to how we will go ahead with the session. Mr. Ashish Maheshwari, who is co-founder of Equicare, he will be introducing Mr. Mahendra Jaju first. We'll run a small clip of his introduction. And after that, Mr. Mahendra Jaju will give his PowerPoint presentation. He will give us all what is happening in the current market. And after that, we will have last 15 minutes, we will be having Q&A session. And I request all the participants to put their questions through chat window with giving their introduction, and we'll try to accommodate as many questions as possible. We will be closing the session at 1 o'clock, as Mr. Jaju has very hectic schedule today. So I wish safety of all the participants. I welcome all the participants. I welcome Mr. Mahendra Jaju. And I hand it over to Mr. Ashish Maheshwari for his introduction of Mr. Jaju. Over to you, Mr. Maheshwari.
Okay. First, can I request chat administrator to keep everybody's mic as well as video on mute mode, and everybody like who has switched on their video, please put it on off mode, and your speakers also, because a lot of background noise is coming. So if you can put that first on mute mode. Yes, one gentleman, Mr. Pradeep Shah, a lot of noise is coming from his side. So administrator, like if you can just put everybody on mute mode. Okay, so in order to just ease out my introduction session, first I request host Rahul to play a small video clip which gives a glimpse of career of Mr. Mahendra Jaju, those who doesn't know him directly. So if you can play out that first.
Mr. Mahendra Jaju is head fixed income at Mirai Asset Global Investments India Private Limited. Mr. Jaju is responsible for managing fixed income assets across all products. He has been associated with the AMC since 2016. He has over 25 years of experience in the field of financial services, including 14 years of experience in fixed income funds management. In his prior assignment, he has been associated with organizations like Asset Managers Private Limited, Tata Asset Management Limited, ABN AMRO Asset Management Limited, and ICICI Group. He is a CA, CS, CFA USA by qualification. Mr. Jaju has a keen interest in traveling, running, reading, and movies.
So it was a glimpse of career of Mr. Mahendra Jaju, and just to give a brief of Equicare Group, also those who are not in touch or who doesn't know about the group. This is a group of around 250 equity and debt markets professionals, and we have a group on WhatsApp, as well as we often meet also and give various presentations. And one thing which is very important, then Mr. Jaju is almost present in all our meetings, and always like he's in demand that whatever is happening in the economy or the debt market, he should have some insight he should give to group. So today we got this opportunity to get him on board so that we can have some views about current turmoil in the debt market, which has really distorted a lot of things about income funds, which middle income people at corporate, they are having their investments. So I couldn't find better person than Jajuji to decode the current turmoil situation in debt market mutual fund and what is the way forward as per him. So over to Jajuji now.
So thank you very much, Ashish ji, for the kind introduction. Thank you very much, all the Equicare family and Arihant team for giving me this opportunity. It's always a pleasure to have an interaction with you, and especially during these times when we are locked down in our homes. I'm very happy to see so many familiar faces on the screen. Just before I start, as you all know, that I work under the SEBI regulations as a fund manager with Mirai. So whatever I discuss on the conference call today, please read it with the appropriate disclosures and disclaimers, which are there at the end of my presentation, and a copy of which is available to you if you need after the conference. Now, let me just switch to the share screen mode and start with the PowerPoint presentation. So hope that all of you can see my presentation. Let me start with a little bit of a slide on the impact of COVID on us. There are two ways it has affected us. First is what has changed for the investor. What has changed for the investor? In my view, everything had changed. The way we look at the economic environment, the way we look at the markets, the way the global macro environment has changed. All of us know that a large part of the world, the global capacity is lying under the lockdown. When we talk about economy, everyone is now saying in one voice that once the crisis is behind us, the way we operate economy will change. And there are a few sectors, for example, like entertainment, travel, tourism, shopping malls, etc., which might undergo metamorphic changes in terms of social distancing and so on. And then when we talk about growth, in the past, our discussion used to be more about how much the economy will grow by, how much the growth will slow down by. But today we are all talking again in one voice about how much the global economy will contract by. And then when you talk about valuations, in the post-coronavirus world, the valuation norms will have to be changed. And as you know that I am primarily a debt guy, I am a fixed income guy. So I'm not talking about how to value the equity markets, but I'm telling you that even for the fixed income, the way we value the fixed income markets in terms of mapping that to inflation and fiscal deficit, some of those things will have to change. So this is what has changed for us. Now, what has changed in us as investors, we are human beings, and as we all know that we have our behavioral biases. So in my view, nothing has changed inside us. And why is that? Because we are still guided by the same biases of greed and fear and other cognitive biases like framing bias. And then we are doing a lot of scrying. Now scrying means that we are trying to do a lot of crystal ball gazing. We are still in the middle of the crisis. If you go by the WHO assessment, they are of the view that we are nowhere near the close of the crisis. And even as the uncertainty is of the highest order, we are trying to do some kind of a future assessment. And then obviously we are being impatient because we can't wait for a clearer picture to emerge. So you see that the whole world has changed. and we have not changed at all, and that's possibly not being very helpful. So there is a need for us more than at any time to win over our cognitive biases and look at the world in a very objective manner to be able to get a meaningful conclusion out of that. Now we are talking about the crisis and the impact of that on the debt markets and mutual funds in particular. Let me quickly spend one slide on what is the anatomy of a crisis. A crisis is primarily comprising of two parts. One is the external factor, as the events that happen in the outside world, and then one's own state of mind. So that is what makes a crisis. Let me give you one example that how the crisis has affected us as the people in the financial world, in the markets, who are by and large, unaffected because our markets are functional. Every day we get the same volatility in the market, and we are able to by and large work as if the world has not changed. But the same is not true for an Uber driver. The same is not true for Indigo Airlines. For them, the whole world has changed. So how the crisis impacts someone is a function of how the external world developments are happening and how is one positioned in that situation. And therefore, again, for someone who is deeply involved in the markets, the equity market volatility is very important. For someone who is in the debt market like me, what's happening in the Reserve Bank and the government world is very important. And then most important part, that as the crisis evolves, our response to the crisis changes. Because when the crisis starts, we don't have the full breadth of the understanding of how the crisis will last. So now we are at the third extension of the lockdown. And when we were discussing the coronavirus crisis at the beginning, we never imagined the possibility that India will also have to face a lockdown. So as the crisis evolves, the response that we give or how we react changes. And let me just in my typical style share one example that when the virus crisis started, as you all know that like many of you, we are all trying to maintain our weight and well-being. So all of us are on a diet mode and exercise mode. So when the crisis started and first time we knew that look, we cannot go out and our society even banned walking on the podium garden, etc. So I was terribly worried as to what happens with all my efforts of the last 1 year where I have lost some weight and I was trying to be in a happy zone. And then suddenly my concern at that point was that by the time the crisis is over, I will be fat again or I will be gaining a lot of weight, etc. But then as the crisis evolved, and as many of you know that I stay in Parel, which is the hotbed of the coronavirus crisis. So in the last 1 week, there are about 15-20 cases of COVID positive confirmation which have happened across the road, the shops, the medical shop that I know, the Delhi Kirana shop I go to, and I understand that there are a lot of confirmations which have come. And now I believe that the crisis is knocking at my door. And my response to the whole situation has changed. And now I'm more thinking like, look, if I survive this, I can always lose weight again. But if I don't, then let me enjoy life. So my eating pattern has completely changed. This is a very simplistic example to make the point as to how the response will change. Therefore, point I'm trying to make is whatever we are thinking today, whatever we are discussing today is relevant only to the extent that we still have maybe about 30-40% of the information on how the crisis will end. Most of our assessment right now is driven by a combination of what has happened in similar crises in the past. So anyone you can talk to will have read the complete theory on the Spanish flu of 1920. But we don't know how the virus will end. At this point, we have no clue. So therefore, we need to be aware that we have to be flexible in our approach to dealing with the crisis. Now, let me come to the point after making the initial preamble. What is the making of the debt crisis that we are facing today? In my understanding, the crisis that we are facing today is a three-step crisis. There have been three stages where the buildup of this crisis has happened, and I am not sure if there is a fourth stage, but so far we have seen three stages. Now let me tell you what are the three stages of the crisis. First was in September, October 2018, when ILFS defaulted. At that point, there was a lot of discussion on how a AAA company can default, how a company in which the majority ownership is by two of the most prominent institutions of the country, LIC and SBI, can happen, but that happened. So that shook the confidence of the market, and the market structure completely changed. That period was preceded by a huge liquidity, post demonetization, etc. So we are all experts in our own domain. So I will not get into detail of that. But suffice to say that the ILFS event changed the way the debt markets function. What was the most significant visible impact of that event? That companies which were lowly rated, so the second tier, third tier corporates and the NBFCs, the second tier, third tier banks, their funding lines were completely squeezed. So therefore, there was a gradual withdrawal of the business momentum by those companies. That in turn had the impact on the lending capacity, therefore the availability of credit, etc., etc. So there was a period of about a year and a half last that only the most renowned, the bluest of the blue chip companies were able to draw funding from the capital markets. And the state of banking, we already know that the banks are themselves paralyzed by and large. There are 2 or 3 large private sector banks who are still fully functional and going all guns blazing, but they are not primarily in the industrial sector, and the credit pickup has also been very, very poor except in the retail segment. So therefore we had the first stage where the markets were largely paralyzed except for the top end of the market. And then the coronavirus breakout happened. Now coronavirus has suddenly cast a huge doubt on the viability of a lot of businesses, right from the largest of the companies to the corporate sector and to the financial world. But since our subject is restricted to the debt markets, I will just focus on what is the impact on some of the financial services players. So as you know that right from 2015-16 onwards, our GDP growth has been slowing down the momentum wise, and the capital investments has been one of the sore areas for the last 5-6 years because no new capacities were being set up. And therefore, the credit demand from the industrial segment was primarily poor, except maybe for working capital requirement. And therefore, the entire credit space was picked up by the NBFCs because banks are good at lending to the industrial companies. They are not as competitive when it comes to the retail segment. Because in India, there are a majority of the people don't have proper documentation. And therefore, it is very difficult to get a loan sanctioned from a bank except for the prime retail segment. So the NBFC suddenly filled a huge vacuum of matching the guy for his requirement of speed, maybe not on 100% documentation, and they were very competitive on the cost factor because the capital market funding for them, especially through the commercial papers from the mutual funds, was easily available. So now that the coronavirus crisis is facing us, what I think is the impact on the NBFCs. So in my view, there are 3 primary areas where these companies are going to face a big challenge. Unfortunately, these 3 areas by and large make up for their entire business. So now which are the 3 areas? I am not going to define the challenges that are being faced by the NBFCs in terms of which sector, etc. My mind thinks that there are the 3 areas. First, that the NBFCs were growing at a scorching pace because of the reason I mentioned, that the banks were paralyzed and their core competence is lending to industrial sector, and the entire growth and the credit expansion was happening in the retail and the HNI segment, where the NBFCs are the most competitive players. Therefore, most NBFCs, and we used to talk so much about how Bajaj Finance is growing at 25-30% every quarter. So because of the coronavirus, now the new consumption has completely got frozen, and the larger analysts community believe that even after the lockdown is lifted, there will be sustained slowdown. In my view, it will, which I will cover why in a little while later when I talk about market outlook. So therefore, their growth factor is gone, and therefore you have to derate the NBFCs for the growth slowdown. Then the second challenge that these NBFCs will face is because of the, again, economic condition where there is a fear of a lot of job loss, income loss, and subdued spending, the new loans will not happen, but at the same time, the old loans will also face a lot of, delays and defaults. So their NPAs will shoot up. And the final challenge for them is that because of now the negativity surrounding the whole financial sector, the NBFCs will find it very challenging to refinance their existing debt, which matures. So therefore, if you see, these are the three lifelines of an NBFC, and all these three lifelines are being choked. And therefore, the segment is going to face significant headwinds going forward, notwithstanding all the regulatory support that is available. And I believe that RBI will soon also announce a direct SPV which may buy some of the difficult credits, but will that be enough? That sounds very, very doubtful to me, but we'll have to wait for the scheme to be announced, if at all it is announced. Now, within the NBFC segment, the biggest challenge will be faced by the tier 2 and tier 2 NBFCs. But that is not all about the coronavirus crisis as to how it has developed into the debt crisis. There is another factor to the coronavirus breakout which has affected the financial markets in a significant way. And if you go back to middle of February, late February, you will have to admit that the financial markets were a little complacent about the developing coronavirus crisis. At that point, the prevalent view was that largely it is a crisis local to China, and China is a country which can take strong measures to contain this, and if at all there will not be any global implication of the coronavirus. And you will also recall that for a long time, even WHO withheld from announcing coronavirus crisis as a pandemic. So global markets will actually complacent to recognize the crisis. Now what happened one fine day, that Italy declared a lockdown. Till that point, except for the people who were closely watching the medical developments, were not so aware of this. The day Italy declared a lockdown, there was a massacre, carnage in the global markets. And why? Because the Italian bond yields, because of the peaceful market situation in Europe for the last 1.5 years, had begun to ease, and the Italian bond yields, which had come below 1%, suddenly spiked to nearly 3%, 2.5-3% in a matter of 2 or 3 trading sessions. And I'll show you a graph. You can see this, that in the middle of March, out of nowhere, the Italian bond yields spiked from under 1% to around 2.5%. That led to a huge scare in the global markets. And that is the point, if you see that March 2 to March 16, that is the point when the global markets took notice of the whole situation. And then suddenly there was a huge sell-off in the bond markets, even in the high credit AAA globally. And that then required a lot of margin funding. There were a lot of stop losses triggered. That had a huge impact on the emerging market currencies. And you will recall that it is at that time that our rupee went to 76.5. So that was the lifetime low for rupee against the dollar. But rupee was not alone in that movement. It was the entire emerging market pack, whether it is Indonesia, South Africa, everyone was part of it. And then that crisis spilled over to the equities market because there was a huge dollar squeeze in the market. And if you recall that Fed had taken a very early notice of the virus crisis, they delivered 100 basis points rate cut, which was one of the largest since the last global financial crisis. But that did not stop this crisis from happening. And you will remember that the Bloomberg Global Stability Index, which is a reflection of how stable the financial markets are, shot up to its all-time high during that period since the global crisis. So there was liquidity shortage in the market. There were huge mark-to-market losses. There were margin funding requirement. So people were selling anything they could lay their hands on. And you will recall there was a day when global bonds, global equities market, global currencies, and even gold were down on the same day, which is a very unusual confluence to happen. Then Fed took the notice, and then Fed injected huge liquidity in the market. So in the second round of the market measures, they cut rate by another time to zero. They started quantitative easing, and then in quick time, Fed also started buying the commercial assets like the including the sub-investment grade corporate papers. So that has brought some signs of stability to the financial market, because it is easily understood that at a time when you have a global medical crisis, if your financial markets are not stable, then it can lead to a complete disruption and chaos. So Fed, along with the other central banks like Bank of Canada, ECB, etc., took multiple measures which then stabilized the financial markets. And that also explains why, in spite of the ground conditions being so scary even now, our equity markets have recovered 50% of the fall. Our currency has recovered a large part of its fall. Last the rupee I checked was trading at around 75 after trading at a high of 76, 75 or so. And the bond yields also have come down. So the global coordinated central bank action has helped make us feel that the crisis is somehow under control, at least on the financial market side. But as a residual impact of that carnage in the global markets, the financial sector is now feeling the heat, because now nobody wants to take additional risk. And therefore, this is the second stage where the crisis became even more severe. And then the final leg of the crisis, as we see now, is what happened with the mutual funds. As you are aware that some mutual funds had problems, but this is now largely an industry problem where especially the credit risk funds as a category are facing huge redemptions, because nobody wants to remain in poor credit. And therefore, there is a huge amount of redemptions, and that redemption is causing in turn more selling by the mutual funds. Now you will see the link between the second stage of crisis and the third stage of crisis, because when the global bond sell-off was happening in March, it also coincided with the FPIs pulling out huge amounts in a very short period of time. The bond yields globally spiked, so our bond yields also spiked, and then that led to negative NAVs in the mutual fund, and then that led to redemption from the mutual fund. So now if you see the big picture, the mutual fund crisis is an offshoot of the first two and not by itself a crisis per se, although that is a very charitable way to look at it. But what happened recently is not something original development by itself. It's a chain of events that have been happening for the last 1.5 years. I hope I made that point clear. And then that has now resulted obviously in the illiquid debt markets. And now you can see that the response to a crisis evolves as it progresses. And you will now relate to why I started with my story of weight loss, worry about the weight gain, and then completely enjoying life, that if I don't survive, then how does it matter whether I gain? Because if I survive, I can lose weight. So I want to highlight this very, very emphatically once again, that whatever we are thinking about the debt crisis or the market crisis in general, or how the equity markets will function, that can change completely by the time the crisis is over. So it is very important that at this point we keep ourselves aware of every single minute development that happens. So that's very important. Now, how the crisis response will change in the case of debt markets, please understand one thing, that in the last 5 years, in the equity markets, we have seen one very, very strong identifiable trend. There are 3 sectors which have faced one adversity after another, and they stand completely decimated today. Those 3 sectors are real estate, infrastructure, and finally the tier 2, tier 3 low rated NBFCs. Right? If you remember, we had such a huge celebration after the primary issues of Equitas and that Ujjivan, and now you see where they are right now, both in terms of business prospect and the stock price. So I think the portfolios which have had the maximum damage were largely exposed to these 3 segments. If you review the portfolios of the mutual funds, then these are the 3 main investments for the funds who are facing maximum problem. Now let me just make another point very clearly. In my view, that crisis that we are facing in the debt mutual funds is an isolated crisis. It is very, very wrong to generalize it and say that, look, debt funds are causing problem or debt funds have problem. Neither of that is true. Everyone who understands debt market, everyone who tracks mutual funds very clearly understands that this is an isolated crisis, because the credit risk funds as a category were very transparent about it, that they're investing in low rated credits, and when there is a disruption in the market, it is only natural that those type of funds will face headwinds, and if those turbulence continue, then at some point it will be impossible to carry on business, and therefore smart money had been going out, which is why there were so many redemptions. Now, if you look at the equity markets also in the last 3 to 5 years, just 3-5 years, I will not go back to 30 years, every now and then we have a big fiasco. So the last one we had was the Yes Bank. Before that we had Cox and King, and I can go on rattling names where one after another there were so many challenges. But no one says that equity markets are finished or equity markets are bad or we should not invest in equity market. Equity markets has more scandals and casualties than the debt markets or debt mutual funds. But no one says that we should close equity markets or equity markets are bad. I think once you understand and develop a deeper knowledge of the mutual fund industry, you will equally appreciate that debt funds are one of the best options for you to invest in mutual funds. I can tell you right now that liquid funds give you about 5% return on your savings deposit equivalent, and we are happy with 2.5% in the bank, and that gap is existing only because of the lack of awareness. And as Warren Buffett says, that if you earn 1.5% extra, and if you compound it over 25-30 years of your working career, you can add up 40% extra to your wealth without doing anything else. So a lot of these nuances I will not go in now, because that is not necessarily the objective of our discussion today. So I think I have made you clear how the debt crisis has originated, and the origin has been, this has been making in the last 18 months. Unfortunately, one after another events have shaped well. What do I think of the debt mutual fund industry? I think the first reaction is always negative, because there are a number of people who are indifferent, who are ignorant, who are panicky, and therefore it is not surprising that in the first wave there has been huge redemption. The redemptions have already slowed down. People have begun to make differentiation between high quality assets and low quality assets, and I think after this cleaning process, the debt mutual funds will come out stronger, come out bigger. After the IL&FS crisis, people wrote of debt mutual funds, but as of March, debt mutual funds had their highest ever AUM under management. So I think we need to be more positive than that. That is my take on the debt crisis overall. I will now spend about 15 minutes in explaining what do I think of the interest rate and the fixed income markets going forward. So let me just come back to my template slide, that this is how we look at the fixed income world. In my view, the fixed income assessment or the interest rate outlook should always be divided in 2 parts. One is the global environment, and the other is the local environment. India as a country has a current account deficit, and we have a huge impact of any turbulence or disruption in the global markets, because we need the capital flows every year to balance our capital account. Now, if you go back to 2018, 2016, 2013, 2008, 2001, 1999, every single crisis in India in the past largely originated from a disruption or dislocation in the global financial markets. If the global markets are at peace, then our domestic factors are relevant. If the global markets are dislocated, then our inflation, our current account deficit, our fiscal deficit, no one cares. So it is important to first analyze global market and then look at the domestic market. Now, how are we looking at the global markets right now? How are we looking at the domestic markets right now? Let me just tell you that because this is an extraordinary situation, and therefore we cannot look at the whole environment in the usual way. We have to, as I said at the beginning of my presentation in my first slide, that we have to look at a different way to value the fixed income world. Now, in my normal presentation, I go through these economic parameters and then we arrive at an interest rate conclusion. But given this whole situation, I would like to spend 10 minutes on how to look at the fixed income markets right now. And that gives you a very big clue for the equities market also, because if bond markets are dislocated, equity markets don't have their leg to stand. So let me divide the market outlook part into 3 sections. First section is, where was India just before the coronavirus crisis broke out? And we are already near the target time of 45 minutes, so I'll keep it short. Just before the coronavirus broke out, we had an inflation which had shot up to 7.5%. Now it has obviously slowed down to around 6%, but still it is around the upper band of the RBI target. We had a fiscal deficit number which was very challenging to meet, which is why the government revised the FY20 fiscal deficit target from 3.3 to 3.8, which was the maximum permissible under the FRBM. And even after 3.8, there were huge gaps which everyone understood. For example, government set a target of 65,000 crores for the divestment. Till the time of the budget, actual number was 25, and after that no divestment has happened. So 40,000 crore is a gap there. The target for the last 3 months of FY24, the GST was around 140, actual numbers was around 1 lakh. So there is an 1,20,000 crore of gap there, and that is over and above the deferred payment to the states of the GST collection, lower allocation to the states, and so on. And then for the FY21, the government took a disinvestment target of 2 lakh crores, telecom receipts of about 1,50,000 crores, and national small savings allocation of 2 lakh crores. So those numbers were also not very convincing, to just put it in the most polite way. And then our growth had slowed down to 4.7% for the quarter ending December, and that is the slowest growth in the last 6 quarters. So there has been a sequential drop in the growth. So the economy was on a downward momentum even before the coronavirus broke out. So just before the coronavirus broke out, RBI was cutting rates. They had cut 6 times, cumulative 135 basis points. But last 3 months they were on hold, and they said, look, inflation has gone up. So our stance is accommodative, but we still will wait for the clear picture to emerge, even though the inflation is driven by the food prices. So just before the virus broke out, as it is, we were in a very, very challenging macro environment. We had a very high inflation. Doesn't matter that it was because of food prices. We had a slowing growth, and we had a very high fiscal deficit without any conviction on how it can come down or even remain the same in the succeeding years. That is a deadly combination of a macro disaster. Therefore, our outlook on the fixed income world was turning to be negative, and we were beginning to bring down average maturities and duration in our funds. And then suddenly the coronavirus happened, which completely changed the world. So I described in my previous section as to how the global sell-off happened, which completely spooked the bond markets, and the bond yields had gone up, and then how the central banks intervened in an unprecedented way, which has for now brought some sense of stability to the financial markets. And then Therefore, we are at a stage where we were in an extremely tricky situation where the market outlook was turning to be negative. And what is the confirmation of that? You will recall, if you're tracking the bond market, that even after the last 2 rate cuts of RBI, the market yields were going up. The 10-year bond yield, which had hit a low of 6.15 sometimes in November, December, had spiked back to almost 6.75, where RBI intervened and did 1 or 2 operation twist, which still did not bring the 10-year yield below 6.5%. So just before the virus broke out, we were in a very challenging situation, and the RBI and the central banks then took a lot of actions, which is detailed on this slide, and therefore there is some sense of stability in the financial markets now. What is the way forward? What do I think will happen to the fixed income market going forward, etc.? And as I said, that at this point we have to look at the markets not in the traditional way of economic indicators and the etc. But I think we need to redefine how we assess the bond markets right now. So let me tell you that in my view, there are 2 challenges that our country is facing today. 2 challenges, and the global markets and all the governments world over are facing the same 2 challenges. The first challenge is on the medical side, right? The first challenge is on the medical side, where we don't know how long this virus situation will continue, whether or not there will be a treatment for the virus, how many people will eventually get impacted, whether there will be herd immunity or will there be massive casualties. At this point, it is very difficult to say. All that we know today as we speak is that India had its highest single day number of cases reported yesterday, especially in Maharashtra and Mumbai. So now people are saying, no, this is happening because the testing is being done. That is partly true. But I think if in one word, if you have to summarize the current situation on the medical front, it is that we have no control on the medical situation. Governments have no control on the medical situation. WHO, medical fraternity have no control on the medical situation. Therefore, all that we can do is take preventive measures. We have no curative measures. So we are taking social distancing, we are taking lockdown, we are taking isolation, etc. Everything in the right spirit, in a positive spirit, hoping that by maintaining isolation, we can break the chain of the virus. But that's the only thing we can do. And there is no guarantee that anything will happen, because even if, suppose after the initial lockdown, there is some containment of the virus, there is a clear case and possibility of a second wave. I mean, Singapore is a classic example, which took early measures and they were very confident, and then they reopened the economy, and now they are locked down till end of June or 1st June, one of the two. And Singapore has reported 10,000 cases just in a matter of 3 days. So at this point, medical side, we have no control. Government has no control, except that it can take preventive measures. There is no curative measure that the government can take. The second challenge that we are facing today is on the economic front, right? Because of the close down or the lockdown, obviously a large part of the global economy is lying under the lockdown. So the global economy is paralyzed. The service sector, which is one of the chief contributors to the GDP growth, and as we very fondly call it, TMT segment, is dead. And even after the lockdown is lifted, there is no certainty as to in what form it will revive. Whether the airlines will have to give you one vacant seat between 2 seats, whether people will go to the malls with the same intensity, whether will people go for vacations. People may actually become very, very conservative, because as the lockdown is happening, it is affecting the economy in 2 ways. One is the production side, which is suffering huge losses, industry, MSME, etc. And on the consumption side, the consumers are facing job losses, income losses, and then there is a fear of health and safety. So therefore, there will be a huge demand destruction as and when this crisis gets over, at least in the initial phase. And therefore, I think the demand conditions will remain subdued post the crisis is over. So we have no control on the medical front. We have no control on the economic front. there is, however, one situation that all the governments world over, including in India, are committed to give as much support, both morally, physically, and financially, to the people who are suffering. So, world over, a lot of governments have given financial support to the industry, SME, large and small industries. All the governments are giving financial relief package to the retail people. Even in our country, government has given 1,80,000 crore relief package already to the poor and deprived, and there is an ongoing talk of a financial measures for the industry. So the only thing, please now listen to this carefully, the only thing that the government can do right now is to give financial support to the people who are suffering. And the only thing that the government therefore can do is to generate fiscal deficit. Then all the global central banks, whether it is Fed, Bank of Canada, and Bank of New Zealand, even RBI, are open, very vocal in saying that they will do what it takes. And we know what we will do what it takes means borrowing it from the phrase which was coined by Mr. Mario Draghi of ECB. So today, fortunately, as I draw the situation, that there is no control on any of these issues that a government or the central bank has. But fortunately, there is only one area in which they have absolute control. That is, in anywhere in the world, there is no limit on how much fiscal deficit you can generate, and there is no limit on how much you can cut interest rates. Today, we are in a world where in half the world, the interest rates are negative. So therefore, if you now look at a situation where there's only one thing a government or a central bank can do, and there is that one thing on which there is no limit, then I think it's an absolute no-brainer which way the interest rates are going. Interest rates have to fall. There is no other way. There is one more very important reason as to why the interest rates have to come down. That is that if and when the lockdown is lifted and the economy has to be brought back to the normal, there is only one narrow path. There is one very narrow corridor, one pipe through which that process has to pass. That pipe, the narrow pipe, that process of recovery of economy, even an attempt to that has to pass. That is of stable financial markets. That is of a vibrant and liquid bond market. That is an environment of low interest rates, high liquidity, and a smooth flow of credit. Why I refer to the financial markets dislocation in March, which completely unnerved everyone, is because that was just the beginning of the crisis. Now I imagine that when the crisis ends and you have a disruption in the financial market, you can forget about any hope of recovery of the economy. Therefore, now if you put the big picture, the only thing that the government can do is generate fiscal deficit. Only thing that the RBI can do is monetize the government borrowing and keep interest rates low. And if that is not happening, then there is no hope for any economic recovery even after the crisis. And fortunately for us, that is the only thing that is in the control of the governments and the central banks right now, not the medical situation, not the economic situation. And which is why all the world over, global central banks are just going backwards, bending backwards to enable that, and that has fortunately also kept our financial markets as stable. Therefore, in my view, it's an absolute no-brainer that interest rates are heading down, liquidity will remain easy, credit process will improve, but the weaker guys will continue to face significant challenges. Now, when I say this, people immediately raise two questions. If there is so much of government borrowing, and then if there is so much of RBI monetizing the fiscal deficit, then there could be inflation, or there could be, other complications given the fact that India is still dependent on the foreign capital. So I have just two quick points to make on that, and I hope to finish in the next 5 minutes. The first is that if you look at the history of the world, when these kind of crises have happened in the past, there are two types of events or catastrophe which can happen to us. One is the type which is physically disruptive. So think of a war or an earthquake or a tsunami. So when these type of events are over, they leave behind themselves a huge trail of devastation and destruction. And once those events are over, then, and typically to those events, there's a definite end at some point. When those events are over, there's a mad scramble for reconstruction and rebuilding of the economy. When an earthquake happens, your airports are damaged, your ports are damaged, your roads are split, your big buildings crash. So there is a natural rush for the reconstruction, and that leads to huge demand of labor, huge demand of materials, huge demand of capital, and therefore typically it leads into high inflation, high interest rates. But because the growth is very high and the demand is pulling up the inflation, the equity markets do very well in those times. Now think of an event like the pandemic that we are facing now, and imagine when the coronavirus crisis is over, all our physical infrastructure will be completely intact. If at all, everyone will be rushing to go back to work. All the entrepreneurs and the industries will want the factories to start. All the labor want to go back to work. Indigo will be desperate to start flying again because they have a huge fixed cost, and all airlines for that matter. So there will be a huge supply. And what we discussed will happen to the demand side: job losses, income losses, significant damage to the confidence level. Even if one doesn't lose job, already we are seeing huge rounds of pay cuts. Even the government staff, unprecedented in our country, government is talking of a pay cut. So there will be a huge destruction of the demand. And then you will end up in a situation where there is more supply than demand in the initial phases. And then the financial capital will already be in surplus because the central banks will keep the liquidity high. The only significant damage that we will see, if at all, and I'm hoping that is not the case by the time the crisis is over, is a huge loss of human capital. Therefore, the one factor of production which might or should become expensive after the crisis is the labor. And if you go back to the history of the financial crisis in the past, whether it is 1920 flu of Spanish flu or the 1380 Black Death, they were followed by huge recessions and deflation. So right now, I think a realistic situation is to worry about deflation and not inflation. Even if inflation happens for a brief while, which is unlikely, I think the whole world, if you read all the academic material right now, everyone is talking of deflationary situation. So that is one. The second factor is of the global implication, because as I said in the beginning of my presentation, that if the global markets are turbulent, then you have a huge challenge in India. Now look at the fortunate situation that India is faced. That in the global environment right now, all the central banks are bending over each other to give liquidity. That is given. But because of the geopolitical environment, especially the fight between OPEC and Russia, and the fact that the US has now become the largest oil producer, or they are becoming self-independent if they're not largest exporter. So that suddenly the US dependence on the other countries for oil has come down. So they have ditched the whole arrangement that they were managing. So because of that political environment, luckily for us, the oil prices have collapsed. So we just heard stories of the negative oil price, etc. Now we are among the largest importer of oil in the world. That has a huge impact on our finances and our credit rating. So oil price at $25, which is lower than the 1999 price in inflation adjusted term, is a huge booster, huge positive for our fiscal deficit, our current account deficit, our inflation, and our currency, which is why part of the reason rupee has rolled back to 75. So if these are the four things that worry you, and if these are the four factors which are now going to get a significant support from the lower oil prices, then I think that's going to address a lot of concerns that we have otherwise. Now, the other challenge is that after this crisis, the global markets will be flush with liquidity, the scenario that we discussed. And FPIs will be looking to invest, and the world over, the interest rates are negative. Our interest rates are still 6%. So expect a huge gush of FPI flows into the debt market. Now, in the past, even in a positive, supportive environment, we have not seen that kind of a flow. So why should it happen that this time? So this time in the budget and followed by the RBI, the FPIs have been given unrestricted access to the Indian debt market in 4 or 5 specified Government of India securities. So the FPIs like now can in the equity market invest unlimited amount and redeem anytime unlimited amount in those 4 or 5 specified securities. So therefore, an FI looking in search, wandering in search of yields will easily find India very attractive, especially if the oil prices remain low. The final point is that if all these things are there and if this is the only choice, that the Reserve Bank and the government has, and they have the unlimited power, whether they will exercise their power and whether the Reserve Bank will ultimately end up monetizing all the fiscal deficit of the Government of India or not, I don't think there is a choice they have, because look, if your option is to survive or to die, I think you will always choose survive. So irrespective of whatever be the ideology, irrespective of whatever be the value system, as I explained, that if the economy has to recover, your interest rates have to be low. Therefore, I think the effort will have to be there. There is no option but that to happen. Now, why then the Reserve Bank is not acting with the same urgency that the Federal Reserve and other people are acting? Because India is an emerging market country. US is the reserve currency of the world. So therefore, I don't think that Reserve Bank just needs to copy what Fed is doing. They have to do what is right for India. In my limited, humble opinion, I think more than any of us, RBI and the government understand that this is a crisis which is still developing. And therefore, I go back to my first point, what has changed in us? We are still crying and we are still being impatient. I don't think they are, because they understand the nature of the challenge. We will have also read the Sanjeev Sanyal interview where he said that pretty much the same thing, that we are sizing up the challenge. So at this point, if you look at the action from the Reserve Bank, the conclusion is very clear. They are still sizing up the magnitude of the crisis, and therefore at this point they are taking action. They are intervening when things begin to turn negative. But when things are okay, stable, normal, they just take a back seat. So at this point, I think RBI's focus seems to me is more on not allowing things to get ugly or things to get out of control than to keep things positive. But they will have to do this at the time when they have a better handle on the end of the crisis. And at that point, there is no other option but for the Reserve Bank to go full on. And let me also tell you that most of the people talk in terms of the government fiscal package of 4 or 5% of the GDP. In my view, ultimately we need 10% of the fiscal deficit as a 10% of the GDP as the support for the economy to recover in a meaningful manner. So that is what I wanted to cover. Thank you very much for your time and thank you very much for your patience. I am now happy to take any question that you might have. Thank you so much.
Juji, are you there?
Hello.
Yeah.
So Jajuji, can you hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you clearly.
Yeah. So thank you so much for your lucid explanation. You've been talking for more than 15 minutes now, and you went exactly to the root cause of why it all started. And I'm sure all the participants must have benefited substantially to understand why this crisis situation is there. So now that we are already at 1 o'clock, at one point of time, 100 participants joined, and there were a lot of messages coming in that they want to join, and they were not able to join because of the full capacity. Since we are at 1 o'clock, I just want to know, can you take a couple of questions? Can we go ahead with few questions?
Yeah, I'm happy. For Equicare, I have all the time. So as long as people have a question, I'm happy to be here.
Okay,
And for Ariel.
So one question is that we have Mr. Naman. He wants to know what will be the impact on the perpetual bonds, and certain banks, PSU banks, perpetual bonds are offering they're giving very good yield as of now. So is it safe to invest there, or do also they carry risk of principal?
Thank you for asking this question. So let me first give you the technical response. I think everything has a price in a bad market and everything has a risk. This time what we have seen is that mutual funds have started selling their relatively illiquid assets first so that they don't get into the same trap. So that's a very positive sign. Normally when the redemptions happen in the first leg, mutual funds liquidate the high quality asset and then they borrow. But this time right from day one, because we understand that this is a crisis of a different type, from day one we have been selling illiquid asset as a industry. I mean, our funds fortunately did not need to borrow or not even facing redemption. So, which is the reason the bond yields have gone up. Now, 81 bonds have never been liquid. People have different experience. So, I think there is a balance of greed and fear. If time permits, I will just like to give you a quick short story to illustrate my point, and I love to do it that way. So, the story is that in a village one day, one man went to buy mangoes and he went to the fruit vendor and then he asked the price, obviously. So fruit vendor said that mangoes are 800 rupees to a dozen. So he said, this is too expensive. Can you lower? So he started bargaining, and then in that process, from the glance of his eye, he saw another basket where a little more ripened mangoes were there. So I asked him, what is this? He said, sir, these are the fruits which fall on their own from the tree after they become ripe. So we just collect it. They are ready to eat. You go home, just squeeze it, you will get the juice and so on. So he said, what is the price? He said, 600. He said, no, if these are second grade mangoes, then 600 is too high. I'll pay you 500. He said, okay. So he goes home, consumes the mangoes, and then next morning, obviously, he wakes up with a hugely upset stomach and he has loose motions. So then he takes medication and then goes and blasts on the fruit vendor that how can you give me this mango? Aisa, mera pura pet kharab ho gaya, alana, I have to spend on medical. So my net cost is now higher than 800. So the fruit vendor stood up very confidently. He said, sir, there is nothing wrong with my mango. There is a problem with your digestion system. He said, why? He said, sir, whatever mangoes of the second grade I am not able to sell at the end of the day, I give it to my cow. She has it every day and she never had an indigestion problem, right? So the point is that it is your risk appetite. No one else can define it. If you're happy to take a high risk, high return proposition, then only thing is you should not complain when you lose. In my view, we have never invested in a low quality paper. My tagline always is that market risk is temporary, credit risk is permanent. We have just experienced what can happen in the Yes Bank episode to the 81 bonds. So be careful when you take credit. In debt, there is only one risk you have, that if you give money and it doesn't come back, then all your return calculations will become upset. Personally, I don't like perpetual bonds as a category for investment in mutual funds. But if you have the capacity to hold on for a long time, and if you will exit only when the market wants it and not when you want to sell it, it's a good asset at these yields for the public sector banks. Thank you.
So Mr. Sachin Mugalka, he wants to know that is looking at the current crisis, is there any possibility that this crisis will roll into the other debt schemes of the AMC?
No, I don't see that possibility. As I told you, that just because a Yes Bank has collapsed or just because a Cox and King has collapsed, the equity market is not going to stop functioning. Exactly the same thing applies to the debt market. Obviously, when the crisis is recent as less than 1 week old, there will be first wave of reaction. Please understand that the industry has dealt with the first wave of reaction very, very successfully. RBI had announced a 50,000 crore line of credit for mutual funds, and we have only availed only 2,000 crore. That is also on day one. That is a token money that has taken. The industry doesn't need liquidity. There is a difficult situation, no doubt. And I don't also rule out a second wave of redemptions or problems. But I think this is not the first time we are facing a crisis. If you see, people who are facing problems are largely one with a huge exposure or a overwhelmingly higher percentage portfolio exposure to real estate, infrastructure, and low-rated NBFCs. So as long as you avoid the bad portfolios as much as we avoid the bad quality stocks in equity markets, it's absolutely fine. I think the industry will come out stronger and bigger post the crisis.
So Mr. Abhishek has asked that how do you see NBFC industry changing? Which NBFCs will survive in what form? Will
So
every
as I-
NBFC need to raise new capital? So within whatever your norms are there, you can reply questions.
Now, as I told you that it is the second tier, third tier NBFCs which will have a huge challenge because even under the RBI's LTRO scheme, TLTRO scheme, banks are not willing to underwrite their credit. So it is not the liquidity challenge, it is the solvency challenge that these companies are facing. As long as this risk aversion is there, they are not going to bounce back again. So the question is same as saying that whether X or Y company which has fallen. I think that the situation is still evolving, but I will be very, very strictly away from the second tier, third tier companies, NBFCs in the mutual fund space. Now again, if someone is running a stressed debt fund or a hedge fund or an AIF, for them on a selective basis, some of these could be opportunities, which is why you will always see a Blackstone or a KKR invest into some NBFCs because they look to build a new future with the situation, because every crisis is an opportunity for someone to start afresh. It is very difficult to give an individual name now, but as a category, second tier, third tier is finished in my view.
Mr. Vikas wants to know that as you are expecting stimulus, which may lead to higher fiscal deficit and higher interest rates, what is your view on that?
As I already explained, that पहला चीज तो है कि मरता क्या न करता. So there is no other option but to spend this money, whatever be the consequence. So therefore, for all our ideological tilt and all the expectations of the negatives or things that can go wrong, it will have to be done. Otherwise, you are finished today. So you will possibly like to defer your demise rather than die today. So I think there is no choice with the government and RBI to do it. In terms of the magnitude, I personally think that anything less than 10% of GDP is a waste of money because it will be neither here nor there. Government should be completely bold and aggressive, and Reserve Bank should support the government completely and go right bang on up to 10%. Even a small country like Germany, which is so conservative, is doing 20% of GDP. This is not something which the government is responsible for. On the other hand, government has the responsibility to address this. As far as the fear of inflation and fiscal deficit is concerned, I already explained that why we should not be fearful of inflation, because of the fact that it is not an environment which is physically disruptive, but it is a demand destructive environment. Therefore, the fear of inflation is not there. Fiscal deficit will not have an impact as long as the RBI buys out the government bond. There will be some spillover of the demonetization, but given the deflationary scenario and the recessionary scenario that we are looking at, I don't fear that a high fiscal deficit is too much of a challenge. On the other hand, if the fiscal deficit is not there, the death is certain.
We'll take one last question. Mr. Pankaj wants to know at this point of time, debt and equity, which is the better option. There are few people who have asked a lot of questions, but they are more of a regulatory nature. So if you can just answer at this point of time, I mean, I know one is the equity part, and that people are not feeling very safe in debt. How better it is as compared to FD, people get little more returns, but at the same time, there is a risk of, is there any risk of losing capital further?
See, to start with, there is more risk of losing capital in equity markets than debt. The history will tell you. While we have so much clamor about the farmer suicide, in my understanding, more people commit suicide after losing money in equity markets than in the farming. So please don't have any of those conceptions. The second is that there is no choice between equity and debt. One cannot put all his eggs in one basket. That is a very fundamental financial principle of portfolio allocation and investing. So anyone who is either 100% into equity is carrying a huge risk, because you may be invested in Yes Bank, which may give you returns for 15 years, and in 3 months everything is gone. Or if you are 100% in debt, then you don't have a financially secure future, because inflation will mean that your real purchasing power will keep diminishing every single year. So there has to be a proper allocation. There are, I think, established portfolio allocation theories. As far as whether people can lose money in debt, yes, any reckless or careless investment will lose money. So the only risk that is there in debt funds is that if you invest in a high or aggressive credit fund, and if there is a market turbulence, then that money will go down the drain. Finally, whether you should choose between FD or just a little bit of return extra in the debt funds, just give you a simple equation derived from Warren Buffett's formula of compounding, that if you invest 1 crore in bank FD versus debt mutual fund, and if you get 1.5% extra return every year, in 10 years you will make 15 lakhs extra, in 20 years you will make 30 lakhs extra, in 25 years you will make 35 lakhs extra. With some compounding of the interest income, you will make 40 lakhs extra. So just by shifting from FD to the debt mutual funds, which can give you 1% or half extra, you can make 40% extra wealth. And if debt is 50% of your asset allocation, you can make 20% extra wealth at the end of your career. Over a 25 years period of investing, the absolute numbers will look mind-boggling. So let us not underestimate the power of 1.5% extra return. Everyone, as I also covered in the beginning of my presentation, that we are all driven by our cognitive biases, framing bias, recency bias. These are all very common. So if we allow the as I normally call it in a joking way, that always follow your dad. Sorry, always follow your dad, which dad doesn't mean your father. Dad means data above desire. The moment you allow your emotions or prejudice to take over the analysis, you are going to face a challenge, either in terms of underperformance of the portfolio or poor performance of the portfolio. Because let me just tell you that history of last 25 years tells you that equity markets have given you, say, about 15% compounded annual growth rate or return. Over the same time, debt mutual funds have given you about 8.5% CAGR last 25 years. That's the history. In spite of all the debacles, there is no way a bank FD or anything can meet any, because of the simple fact that debt markets are, debt mutual funds are market related product. When the market prices anything efficiently, there is no other, competition that can match it. So one should do a careful analysis and have a suitable portfolio diversification and invest into products which give you market related return. Obviously, when you invest in market related products, it will have risk. So if you don't manage your risk or if you get greedy and get into high risk product, then I think, like the person who bought the cheaper mangoes, please blame your digestion system, not this debt mutual funds. Thank you.
So Jajuji, you've been talking more than an hour now, and I know you have very hectic schedule, as you had mentioned earlier. But आप इतने लोगों के चाहते हो कि questions भी और आ रहे. Can I take one last single question?
Yeah, I think last one question, then that will be good.
Sure. Thank you so much. So Mr. Pradeep wants to know what happens to rupee with a huge stimulus?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. So as it's not only about rupee, but about the entire macroeconomic pack, whether it is inflation, fiscal deficit, currency, or current account deficit, because as we know that all are interlinked with each other, and everyone has a cross impact over each other. So rupee is one part, current account deficit is other part. At this point, we are fortunate that the oil prices have collapsed, and globally there is a scene of surplus liquidity, and we have a pandemic and not an earthquake, which means that at the end of this, we will most likely be facing a recessionary and deflationary scenario. So I think at this point, the market tolerance for a higher fiscal deficit, market tolerance for all these adversities is much higher than it would be in the normal case, and therefore I think market will react much more positively to a 10% fiscal deficit than to a 4% fiscal deficit, because 4% will definitely be inadequate to address the current situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jajuji, for sparing so much of your time, giving lucid explanation and also answering all the questions so elaborately. So I thank everybody, all the participants I thank stakeholders at Arihant, Mr. Ashok Kumar Jain, Mr. Arpit Jain. I thank Mr. Ashish Maheshwari, Mr. KG Mantri for enabling this session. I again thank once again for making this session very successful. And I wish safety to everybody, and that we conclude today's session. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you so much.